Hi, I'm John Graham. I'm the Director of Finance for the Trust, and I'm going to take you through the finances for last year and also just a little bit of a forward look. So in terms of the first one, it just gives you an overview of our financial plan for 1920. We were set a control total of a deficit of some 3.6 million by NHSI. If we achieved that total, we got £24.5 million worth of external support, but it was predicated on us making £14.2 million worth of cost improvement savings. Without those, we would have had about a £42.3 million deficit. The next slide just gives you some detail of where we get our money from. We get the bulk of our money from the CCGs, and as you can see, the vast majority of it comes from Stockport CCG with just under 192 million. And in total, we got just under £340 million for the year. The next slide actually gives you our financial performance for the year end. In terms of our actual position for 1920, we delivered a £2.5 million surplus. That was after a total of £27.7 million external support. We got an additional amount of financial recovery fund after improving on our original position we said we would deliver. We also had a £2.7 million impairment reversal. This is around the valuation of our fixed assets and enabled us to deliver the £2.5 million surplus. We delivered £13.5 million worth of CIBs. Of that, 4.7 million was delivered on a recurring basis. CIBs are basically just the cost improvements or efficiency savings that we are required to make every year, and that's no different to every other provider in the NHS. And we paid some £1.7 million on interest in loans throughout the year. The next slide just gives you some detail on how we spent our money. So you can see the vast majority of our money is spent on pay costs. So in total we spent about £244 million on pay, and of that the biggest element was on nursing at about £62 million. And then we spend about £83 million on non-pay costs, and again the biggest items in there are drugs at just over £21 million. So in total we spent £337 million. In essence, as a trust, we spend just under £1 million a day, £924,000. So you can see it's quite a significant sum we spend every day. The next slide just gives you some headline information on how we spent our capital. You can see there that the vast majority of the capital was spent on equipment, some £5.5 million. We spent about £3 million on maintaining our estate and over £5 million on IT, and then the balance was on other. So even though we had a really challenged financial position, we were still able to invest in the trust, in goods, in assets and in services, and that's a really positive thing for the organisation. Next slide just gives you some idea of some of the revenue investments we were able to make. So again, even though we were financially challenged, we were able to spend about £1.9 million in total on a number of items. Some of these were planned items at the start of the year, some of those were in response to what happened during the year. In total, we spent about £1.5 million on nursing over a range of things. Most of it was about recruiting additional staff, either through international nurse recruitment or through the trainee nurse associate programme. We spent just under £100,000 on medical trainees, and then the balance was across a range of things. But in total, £1.9 million was invested on additional items throughout last year, which again, as I said before, in terms of our financial position was a massive thing for the Trust, and particularly that investment in nurse staffing. The next slide just gives you a rough bridge around how we've moved across the year. It shows that we went from the underlying deficit position to where we got to at the end of the year around the surplus and what we've posted in the financial position this year. The next slide actually gives you a bit of information about the underlying position. So even though we reported a £2.5 million surplus in our accounts, actually the true underlying position for the Trust was a £43 million deficit. That's because we received additional support in terms of hitting our control total. We had the impairment reversal, which I've talked about before. Some of the CIPs we delivered were non-recurrent in nature because we only delivered for £4.7 million worth of recurrent service. So the best part of the savings, £10 million, were non-recurrent. And you can see on the table that gets us down to an underlying position of £43 million deficit. That is a challenge for the Trust. It is something that we need to address going forward, and it is something that we will need to have a plan to put right over a number of years. In terms of the plan for this year, 2021, obviously COVID-19 has had a massive impact on that. The Trust was just in the process of considering the control offer from NHSI. We actually received an offer from NHSI saying if we achieved overall balance, again, we would receive about £20 million worth of external support to be able to do that. When the board was considering this in February, we actually reached a point where we thought, no, we can't do this because the level of savings that we would have to make, bearing in mind our underlying position was the £43 million, which I've just talked about, was probably too big an ask for the Trust. So we had indicated to NHSI that we were minded not to accept that control total. However then, we had all the issues around COVID and it meant that we had a new financial regime for 2021. And in essence, we've moved to a block contract arrangement, and the main principle of that arrangement is to ensure that there's enough cash in providers to pay their bills, and we've moved back to almost that system where cash is king. These temporary arrangements are in place for the first 4 months of the year, i.e. April, May, June and July. Conscious that we are now beyond that period, and the guarantee has been given that those arrangements will continue for at least August and for September while the centre considers the rest of the financial year. Early indications are that they will continue with some sort of block arrangement. That means that PBR, i.e. the system where we used to get paid for activity, and therefore the more activity we did, the more we get paid, or conversely, if we didn't do the activity, we didn't get paid. That has been suspended, and the likelihood is that for the remainder of this financial year, we will be paid on some sort of block arrangements. However, the centre has indicated that we may have to make some level of efficiency savings going forward for the remainder of the year. But at the time of filming this, we are not certain of those arrangements and we are awaiting further guidance. The reality is, at some point, the Trust will have to make further efficiency savings and will have to do something to address its underlying financial position, and we need to bear that in mind when we are considering our financial plans, both for the remainder of 2021 but also going forward. In summary, the Trust achieved its financial targets for 1920. The interim financial arrangement in place for 2021 due to COVID-19 is likely to continue for the remainder of the year, but we still have that underlying deficit of between 40 to 50 million pounds. The reason why I say between 40 and 50, the indications are that our underlying problem will have increased from where it was at the end of last financial year for what's happened in the first 4 or 5 months of this year, and we need to do a detailed piece of work to understand that. That means there are significant gaps in finances in future years without continued action, and at some point we will need to have firm plans in place to address some or all part of that challenge. Thank you very much.